thank everybody for joining us in our live webinar. This is the Microsoft Power BI UK user group, and we're here with Nikola Ilic. Thank you very much for joining us all the way from Austria. So Nikola is a Microsoft Power BI data platform MVP, and the good thing I like about Nikola is he likes to make music from data, which is obviously music to my ears. So we've just been discussing his history, and Nikola is what I would call a full stack Microsoft data platform engineer. So moving from T-SQL all the way through up until Power BI. And it's great to have Nikola here with us today. I'm going to give you some more information on his website as well later, which is Data Mozart. And like I mentioned, he is a Microsoft MVP and also a Pluralsight author. Now, with that being said, I will hand over to Nikola to go through his session with us today called Fold on Tight.
Okay. Thanks, Leon. Thanks for this nice introduction. And first of all, thanks for having me today. It's really a pleasure to present for Microsoft Power BI UK user group. Good evening from Austria. I think it's evening also in UK. So yeah, so today I want to talk about one of the non-glorified but very important features in Power BI, or to be more specific, Power Query engine. And that feature is called query folding. Like my friend Ben Whaaaat, who leads the Dublin Power BI user group, once said when we had a discussion about query folding, he called it unsung hero of Power BI. And that's the perfect definition, believe me. So if you heard sometimes like, will that break query folding? Does your query fold? Maybe you, as I said, maybe someone asked you those questions, but you were like, query what? Or maybe you've heard about query folding, but you didn't know how to take advantage of it in real life scenarios. And if you recognize yourself in at least one of those two situations, then this session is for you. We will learn what is a query folding, in which scenarios Power BI will apply it, and how you as a Power BI developer can benefit from understanding this concept. Before we start, I will just briefly continue what Leon started regarding introduction. My name is Nikola Ilic. I'm originally from Belgrade in Serbia, but for the last 5 years, I live in a wonderful city of Salzburg in Austria, where I work as a business intelligence developer at company ITSP Services. Living in Salzburg was the reason why I have chosen my nickname, Data Mozart. I guess you all know that Salzburg is worldly famous as a birthplace of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, so I was brave enough to use his last name as part of my nickname. And that's why my motto is make music from your data. You can find me on web. I'm regularly blogging at data-mozart.com. I'm also active on social networks, LinkedIn and Twitter, so feel free to get in touch. Other than that, coming from a Microsoft data platform background, started with SQL Server, worked with analysis services, multidimensional reporting services, integration services, and most recently, if you consider the last 4 years as recent, with Power BI. Privately, I'm father of 2 kids and true football and Barca fan, as you can conclude looking at the photo on your screen. So let me briefly walk you through the contents of our session today. We will kick it off with talking about data shaping as one of the most important concepts in data preparation process in order to put our discussion in the proper context. Next, I will spend a few minutes describing Power Query as it is an environment where query folding residing or not. Then we will focus on explaining what is a query folding and why should you understand this feature in a proper way. After that, you will see why people say that the devil is in the detail. I will try to show you a few tips and tricks related to query folding and how to avoid those possible pitfalls. Of course, there will be a few demos along the way, and we will wrap it up with recommendations how to proceed further from this session and deepen your knowledge regarding query folding. Story about data shaping starts in unusual way. I guess you all know the book written by Thomas More called Utopia. In that story, everything is perfect and everyone is satisfied. In this ideal world, let's call it data utopia for us, we have clean, high quality data that just comes into our reports as it is, without needing to perform any kind of facelifting or transformations along the way. Fortunately or unfortunately, data utopia can exist only in books. I said fortunately because we'll probably don't have our jobs if it will be the opposite. Reality is more cruel as we have to deal with a whole bunch of challenges while nurturing our data. That being said, one of the key concepts that we have to absorb is data shaping. Data shaping is the process you should perform once you get familiar with your data and become aware of possible challenges within the data you are planning to use in your business intelligence solution. I've intentionally used the term business intelligence instead of Power BI, as this is a general concept that should be used outside of Power BI solutions too. In most simple words, data shaping is the process of data consolidation before it becomes part of your data model. The key thing to keep here in mind is the word before. So one would perform data shaping before the data goes into the report itself. Data shaping can be done at different places, and depending on where you apply data shaping techniques at different points in time during the data preparation process. So where should you perform data shaping? First, source database. This is the most obvious choice and in most cases the most desirable scenario. It is based on traditional data warehousing principles of extracting, transforming, and loading data, or shorten ETL. In this scenario, you define what data you want to extract, as not all data from the database is needed, and it's usually not a good idea to import all the data. Then you decide if your data needs to be transformed along the way to better suit your reporting needs. For example, do you want to perform currency conversion, or do you need to conform country or city names, for example? That being said, do you recognize the city on the screen? Yes, it's New York. Or is it NYC? Or is it New York City? Which one of these three names is correct? Yes, all of them are correct. But if you import the data in your data model like this, you will get incorrect results, as each name will be treated as a separate entity. This and many more potential caveats need to be solved during the data shaping phase, and that's why it is important to spend some time massaging your data. If you don't perform data transformations on the source side, the next station is Power Query. Power Query is the built-in tool within Power BI that enables you to perform all kinds of transformations to your data. According to Microsoft's official documentation, you can apply more than 300 different transformations, and that number is constantly increasing. The key advantage of Power Query is that you can perform complex data transformations with little or no coding skills at all. Additionally, all steps you've applied during the data transformation process are being saved, so every time you refresh your data set, those steps will be automatically applied to shape your data and prepare it for consuming via reports. Under the hood of Power Query is a mashup engine that enables your data shaping process to run smoothly. Power Query uses very powerful M language for data manipulation. And now you're probably asking yourselves what all this story about data shaping and Power Query, mashup engine, M language, and so on has to do with query folding. I don't blame you, it's a fair question, but we will come back soon to answer it. For some data sources, such as relational databases, for example, but also for some non-relational data sources like OData or Active Directory or Exchange, mashup engine is able to translate M language to a language that this underlying data source will understand. In most cases, it's SQL. By pushing those complex calculations and transformations directly to a source, Power Query leverage capabilities of those robust relational database engines that are built to cope with large volumes of data in the most efficient way. And that ability of Power Query's mashup engine to create a one single SQL statement combining all M statements behind your transformations is what we call query folding. Or let's make it simple. If the mashup engine is able to generate a single SQL query that is going to be executed on the data source side, we say that the query folds. As I already mentioned, the most obvious beneficiary of query folding are relational database sources such as SQL Server, Oracle, or MySQL, for example. However, it's not just that SQL databases take advantage of query folding concept. Essentially, any data source that supports some kind of querying language can possibly take advantage of query folding. And those other sources are, for example, Exchange or OData, SQL Server analysis services, SharePoint lists, and stuff like that. On the other hand, when you use data sources such as Excel files or blob storage files or flat files, etc. in your Power BI data sets, query can't fold. Simply, there is no querying language for those kind of data sources. However, when it comes to data sources that support query folding in general, it's important to keep in mind that not all transformations can be folded and pushed to a data source. So just to be clear here, a fact that SQL database supports query folding by default doesn't necessarily mean that your query will fold. There are some Power Query transformations that simply can't be translated and pushed to a SQL database engine. And very often, as you will see in some of the examples later, some subtle differences in the Power Query transformations can be decisive in the final outcome and if your query will fold in the end or not. I will show you a few of those subtle differences later during the demo. Generally speaking, the following transformations when applied in Power Query can be translated to single SQL statement. Removing columns from your tables, renaming columns also, then filtering rows with static values or Power Query parameters as they are treated as where clause predicates in SQL, grouping and summarizing which have equivalent in SQL group by clause, then also merging of foldable queries based on the same source. This operation will be translated to join in SQL. And when we said merging of foldable queries, that means it should work if you're joining two SQL Server tables, but it will not work if you're trying to join, for example, SQL table and Excel file, as Excel file is a non-foldable data source. Also, pending foldable queries based on the same source, similar logic as in the previous case, this transformation relates to union all operator in SQL. Also, adding custom columns with simple logic. What does simple logic means? Using M functions that have equivalents in SQL language. For example, mathematical functions or text manipulation functions. Also, pivot and unpivot transformations should fold. On the other hand, some transformations that will prevent query from folding are merging queries based on different sources, as I previously explained, also appending queries from different sources, like in the previous case, adding custom columns with complex logic, or using some M functions that don't have their counterpart in SQL. Next, adding index columns will also break query folding. Changing column data type. This one is typical it depends case. I will show you later on what it depends, but just keep in mind that changing column data type can be both foldable and non-foldable transformation. Okay, as we explained, what is query folding, which data sources support it, and which transformations within data source itself. Let's examine why is it important to achieve this behavior, or maybe it's better to say, why should you care if the query folds or not? When you're using import mode in Power BI, data refresh process will work much more efficient when the query folds, both in terms of refresh speed and resource consumption. If you're working with direct query or dual storage mode for your tables, as you're targeting SQL database directly, all your transformations must fold, or your solution will simply not work. Finally, query folding is also of key importance for incremental refresh feature. It is so important that Power BI will warn you once it determines that query folding can't be achieved. It will not break your incremental refresh completely, but without query folding in place, incremental refresh wouldn't serve its main purpose, and its main purpose is to reduce the amount of data that needs to be refreshed in your data model. Because without query folding, Meshup engine will need to retrieve all the data from the data source and then apply subsequent steps to filter the data. With all these in mind, you should tend to achieve query folding whenever possible. One important disclaimer here, and this is one of the key takeaways I would say from this session. If your report is slow, or your visuals need a lot of time to render, or your data model size is large, query folding has nothing to do with it. Keep that in mind. Only if your data refresh or incremental refresh processes are slow and inefficient, you should investigate your Power Query steps in more depth. Another important thing, another important consideration, all or nothing. Um, it's query folding is not all or nothing process. That means if you have, let's say, 10 transformation steps and within Power Query, and your query folds until 6th step, you will still get some benefit from partial query folding. However, once the query folding is broken, it can't be achieved anymore. To simplify, as you see on your screen, um, even if you have transformations that support query folding by default in steps 6 to 10, like in our example where filtering should be foldable step, those steps will not fold. Keep that in mind, and in case that you have some non-foldable steps, try to push them down the pipeline as much as possible. I will show you later one example of this scenario. Okay, now we are not rookies anymore. We know what is query folding, why should we strive to achieve it, and some subtle tricks that can make a huge difference. And now it's time to learn how can we check if the specific query fold or not. The first and most obvious way is to right click on the step, transformation step, and check how view native query option looks like. If it's grayed out, this step probably doesn't fold. On the other hand, if you are able to click on this option, that means that your query again probably will fold. I guess you're maybe confused with word probably, but that's the proper word, as you can't be 100% sure that if the view native query option is disabled, that your query doesn't fold. I will show you in a few minutes how can this option trick us to think that the query folding was broken, even though that in reality folding actually occurred. Instead, when you want to be 100% sure if your query folds or not, you can use query diagnostics feature within Power Query Editor or good old SQL Server Profiler as reliable way to check all the queries that are being sent to an underlying database from the Power BI engine. Additionally, there is a cool new feature in Power Query Online. It's not so new anymore, but still quite fresh, where each step is marked with the icon that shows if that step folds, doesn't fold, or is it unknown. As I said, this feature is available only in Power Query Online at the moment, so let's hope that Power BI team will implement it soon in desktop edition also. Fine, I've already told you that during our session you will find out why people say that the devil is in the detail, and now it's time to understand how little nuances can make a big difference in our data transformation process. So we are ready to get our hands dirty and learn query folding on practical examples. Devil number one is merge join, and this one is very interesting as you will hardly assume what is happening in the background. So let's switch to Power BI desktop. I'm using AdventureWorks. You're familiar with this sample database. And let's say that I want to combine two of my queries into one. And I want to use fact internet sales, for example, and let's say dim customer tables. First of all, I will get rid of some columns here because it would be more readable in the end. So I will keep only customer key because I will need it for joining, and I will keep sales amount, let's say. Okay, and now I will do right click here, new query, and combine. Now I will select merge queries as new, and I will choose my fact internet sales table and dim customer table. I want to perform inner join on customer key column. And once I click OK, you will see that here is the result. If I click on view native or right click on the applied steps, I will see that view native query option is disabled, which may so you may think that this query doesn't fold. Let's check if that's the true. You can activate this diagnose feature either here directly here if you right click on this tab, so you can turn it on here, or if you go to Tools tab here, and there is a feature called Diagnose tab. And let's wait a few seconds. I'm interested here in source aggregated results. And the column I want to check is data source query. So I want to check what query was sent to my underlying database. And let me zoom it a little bit. So you can see here that we have two separate queries here. The one that targets our fact table with our two columns, and the other one that targets dim customer table. So this query really didn't fold. How do we solve this? Let me first delete this one to avoid confusion. How do we solve this? There are two possible solutions, and let me show you what happened here so you can better understand. Once you apply merge queries as new, what Power Query Engine will do, it will generate this M code that will be, it will generate this M code and use function table.nested join. So the first solution to this problem, this one is probably more simple, is just to expand this dim customer table. So I don't know if that's a bug or what, but if you expand this dim customer table, and now you click on this step, now view native query option is enabled, and if I click on this, I can see that this query folded and Power Query Engine was able to generate a single SQL statement that will be executed on the SQL Server side. That's the one solution. The other solution is if I do again new query, and this time I will do a blank query, and I will write my M code by hand. So you can also do this. So I will use table join. Instead of table nested join, I will use table join function. And here I need to provide, oops, that shouldn't work without T. So I need to provide some arguments to this function. The first is tables that I'm joining. So I'm joining fact internet sales table, and I'm joining on customer key column. And the other table is dim customer, and also on customer key column. And finally, I will provide additional argument join kind inner, as I want to do just an inner join here. And once I created this query, you see that the results are exactly the same. If I click on source, it's disabled. So you may think that this query again didn't fold, but let's check if that's true. So if I open diagnose now again, and let's check these aggregated results, I will go to data source query. Boom. So basically this query folded. You see that we got exactly the same SQL code as when we expanded our previous table in our previous solution. So we were tricked here, and we found two devils in this example basically. The first one was join type, that we were able to solve either by expanding dim customer table or by writing proper M code. And the other one was the incorrect behavior of view native query option. So I'll show you later one more example when view native query lies, but this one is for you to check. Always double check if your query really folds or not. Okay, so I will again delete this. We don't need this anymore. Fine, perfect. Okay, the next one, the devil number 2, is changing data type. And yes, so one of the most common transformations basically in Power Query is changing data type. As you know, it's about best practice always to use proper data types in your data model. For example, if you don't need hours, minutes, and seconds level of granularity in your reports, you should be better off getting rid of them and change data type of that column from date time to date only. However, you know how they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So let me show you one really subtle difference that can cause your query to become damn slow, even though you stick with this recommendation to use proper data type. So let's go back to Power BI Desktop, and let's say that in my fact internet sales table, let's go to original edition, and let me find, for example, order date column. And let's say that we want to get rid of these hours, minutes, and seconds here in this column. So there are at least two possible ways to do this. One is if I right click on this column and I can choose change type. And instead of date time, I will use date. So if I right click on this tab, view native query option is enabled, and I will click on it, and you see that this query falls. And Power Query Engine was able to nicely use this convert T-SQL function to perform the action that we wanted to apply. And that's fine. And few important things happen here, so let me explain each of those. First thing is in the applied steps pane here, you can notice that our transformation steps have been recorded. In the column itself here, you can see that time portion disappeared. And as I shown you, when we open the View Native Query dialog box, you can see that the mashup engine nicely translated our transformation to a T-SQL convert function. And keep that in mind. So here, the M formula applied to this transformation step is table.transform column types. Table.transform column types. Let's now examine the other option to change data type of our column. So I will delete this step. And now I can also right click on this column, and under transform, I can choose date only. Again, let's check what happened. So instead of change type step name, we now have a step called extracted date. The column itself looks exactly the same as in our previous example. No hours, minutes, and seconds here. But if we check here, this query doesn't fold anymore. As you can see, View Native Query option is grayed out. Let's check if the query folds or not. So I will go to Diagnose. Let's check our data source query column, and you can see that this query didn't fold in the end. So that's true. And this time, let me go back. This time we have another function here, table.transform columns. So in our previous example, we have a function called table transform column types. So basically one word, table transform column types versus table transform columns, caused our query not to fold. And that could make a significant impact, especially if you're dealing with large tables. So be careful when you're changing data types. Always use this change type option here from the drop down list. That's the way to go, basically. Okay, devil number 3. Yeah, so writing native SQL queries. One of the earliest, this is one of the most important considerations regarding query folding, and one of the earliest decisions you need to make when you are importing data for your Power BI report is, should I import data as it is and then do all transformations in Power Query Editor, or should I write SQL query by hand and select specific portion of data that I want to return? If you choose this latter option, once you write custom SQL statement, your query folding is broken. It's done, gone. Whichever step you apply after the original one, it won't fold. Even if you wish to filter rows, which is always foldable step, in this case, it will not fold. So keep in mind, once you've written your SQL code to retrieve the data, you've closed the door for query folding. Or maybe not. There are some cool tricks that I will show you in a few minutes, and let me show you what I'm talking about. So let's go back again to Power BI Desktop, and let's use native SQL query for retrieving data to our Power BI report. I will connect to my SQL Server database. I think it's Adventure Works DW 2017. And I want to write my SQL query by hand. So you expand these advanced options here. And I will write here select star from dim date, whatever. Okay. And let's wait a few seconds. That's it. Let's rename it just for the sake of clarity. I will call it SQL dates. Never mind. So we know that it's coming to our report by writing SQL. And let's say that I want to keep only dates after January 1st, 2007. So here my date started at 1st January 2005. I want to filter data and keep only those rows where the value is after or equal to January 1st, 2007. Fine. And you can see that we have now our filtered data. And if I right click now on this tab, you see that view native query option is disabled. So let's check if that query false or not. Again, I will go to aggregated here and do a data source query. And you can see that the only query that Mashup engine generated and sent to a SQL Server is this one, select star from dim date. So what will happen here? Power BI will import all the data from the underlying database and then perform filtering condition that we applied. So I don't need to tell you that, yeah, it's not the most efficient way for your, in terms of time and resources used. So again, let's go and delete this. And there is, in fact, a solution to this challenge, and solution is to apply the most obvious solution, the most desired solution is to apply all necessary transformation within source database. So for example, if I go here and I add here where clause, where full date alternate key is equal or greater than 2007, January 1st. So basically I'm filtering my data on the source side and I will get only those rows that I need. That's the most desirable way. The other thing, so you can go and if you need to combine data from multiple tables and you want to write SQL by hand, you can go and create a database view and encapsulate all your transformations within this database view. And then you import this view, which already contains data in the shape you want. And you then can apply additional transformations in Power Query Editor on that database view, as view is a database object, same as table, that supports query folding by default. So takeaway from this example is, if you prefer to write SQL to perform data transformations, wrap your logic in the database view and then import this view as it is in Power BI. One important remark here, and that's interesting. Chris Webb recently wrote a blog post that you can explicitly enable query folding on your handwritten SQL query. So let's see how you can change the default behavior of the native query folding. Let me show you. This is a neat trick, kind of workaround, but it still works. So let me do again new query and SQL Server. I will again use my SQL Server here, and I will not choose any kind of, and I don't want to write my SQL here. So I will just choose import, nothing else. And once Power BI offers me a list of database objects, I will right click on my AdventureWorks DW 2017 table and choose to transform data. Okay, so far so good. What I can do now, I can right click on the navigation step, which is the last step in my Power Query Editor, and I can choose insert step after. That will give me a possibility to write by hand M code in this custom step. And here I can use a function called value.native query. And here I need to provide some arguments. The first one is the database name. The second is the query that I want to run. So I want to run exactly the same query as in the previous case, select star from dim date. Third argument is irrelevant, so I will provide null. And the final thing is, this is the key thing. So enable folding. Final, the fourth argument is enable folding, and we are setting this argument, this value explicitly to true. I will confirm this, and you can see that again I have exactly the same amount of rows in my table. And let's go again and do a filtering of our dates. So again, I will choose date time filters, and I want to keep only those rows that are after or equals to January 1st, 2007. So everything as in the previous case. And again, we see that our table was filtered, so we have dates starting from January 1st, 2007. And if I now right click on this step, you see that view native query option is enabled. Let's check this, and yes, so you can see that basically this query folded. So our filter condition was translated to a where clause in an underlying SQL Server database. As I said, this is a workaround, and it has a lot of limitations at this moment, so you can't do joins or whatever in this query that you are writing within the value.native query function. But who knows, maybe in a few months or so, we get a solution for native SQL query to fold by default without those workarounds. At this moment, keep in mind that by default, writing native SQL query will break query folding. Another one, I promised to show you one more example when view native query can fool you to think that your query doesn't fold even if it folds. So let's go and check how that can happen. I will go to my fact internet sales table. Again, I will choose just 2 columns for the sake of clarity. Let's keep again customer key and sales amount. And let's say that I want to keep only top, I don't know, 3,000 rows. If I now check this step, I can see that this query folds. So you see that our request was translated to top clause in T-SQL. That's fine. Oops, sorry. And let's say that I want, for whatever reason, to transform my sales amount column and to set absolute value of the sales amount. And you would assume that if you're coming from T-SQL world, you know that there is a function ABS in T-SQL, and you would assume that this transformation step can be easily translated to ABS function. But if I right click on this step, you see that view native query option is disabled. How the hell is that? So let's go to diagnose and check. And if we go to data source query column, in fact, you can see that this query folded in the end. So there is ABS function used from T-SQL. So I don't know why does it show in Power Query Editor, why does it show like the query folding was broken when it's not. So be careful, and yeah, whenever you are sure that there is a counterpart for some transformation step in SQL language, double check if your query folded or not. So again, I will delete this. Okay, going back to our presentation. Okay, if I didn't manage to convince you so far why you should strive to achieve query folding, let me now pull my last ace up the sleeve, and I will show you the difference in performance between the queries that return exactly the same results. One of them folds and the other not. And this one, for this demo, I will use Contoso database because AdventureWorks is too small. It has around 60,000 rows. This one for Contoso fact table has around 13 million rows, as you can see, and it's the difference in performance will be more obvious. So let's go to transform data and let's apply some transformation steps here. So I have my fact online sales table, and let's go, and as a first step I will expand dim customer table and grab first name, last name and gender. Then I will do some change on my first name column. I will transform it and use uppercase to transform all first names to uppercase. Then let's go to our dates, date key, and I will use this foldable step, change type, and I want to keep only date. That's fine. Then I will go and expand, let's say, dim product, and grab a brand name from this table. Okay, then I will do, what can I do? I can do, let's say, absolute value of sales amount. Here I will do transform absolute value. What else can be done here? So let's filter some tables. I will filter total cost table, and I want to keep only those rows where total cost is greater than 5. Okay, I will then remove this ETL load ID column. I will remove this. Then I can do replace, let's say, in gender. I want to do transform, and I want to do replace values. So replace values. I can't see. Yeah, replace values. Yeah, all dice. So I want to replace M with male in my data set. And finally, let's say that I want to keep only those rows where sales amount is greater than, let's say, 300. Fine. If I right click on this last step, you see that view native query option is enabled, and I can expand my native query window and see that I have SQL query, single SQL statement. It's not, maybe it's not the best, the most optimal SQL, and keep that in mind that Power Query engine will generate correct SQL. So it will not generate the most optimal SQL. So if you're coming from SQL world, probably this looks, this looks awkward to you. But in the end, we have one single SQL statement that will be pushed down to a data source side. And if I hit close and apply, let's wait for a few seconds. Maybe not few, but I think it will not take too much time. So we are loading data. Just pay attention to batches of rows that are being imported into Power BI. The batches are like 100, 120,000. So pretty large batches, which is a good indicator that your query faults. So we are getting like 120,000 rows per second, let's say. And you see, just remember this number, that Power BI loaded basically 2.8 million rows. I will now format this a little bit better. So you see that we have 9.8 million rows. And this is the number of rows that was imported into Power BI. And it took around, I didn't measure, but maybe 30-40 seconds to load the data into Power BI. Now, if I go back to Power Query Editor, and let's intentionally break query folding here. The easiest way to do this is changing type for our dates, as is shown you in one of previous example. So I will remove this step here, change type. Yes, I want to delete. And here I want to apply this transformation step that will break my query folding. So I'm doing this intentionally. You shouldn't do this in reality, of course. This is just for the demo purpose. So here you can see that after this step, query folding was broken, and all subsequent steps, even those filtering rows and stuff like that, basically I can remove this. Sorry. Yeah, my mouse doesn't work as expected. So I will remove this expanded dim product. It's not necessary to have it here. And so basically after this step, all subsequent steps will not fold. What that means for you when you are refreshing your data. Let's hit close and apply and wait. And we will wait, believe me. So in previous case, we had like 30-40 seconds. Now the first thing you can spot is now the batches are way smaller. So they are like 30-40,000 instead of 100,000, 120,000. Now they're smaller, and Power BI imports data in batches of 20, 30, 40,000, whatever. So let's wait maybe a minute for this to complete. We are close to 2.8 million rows. Maybe 10, 20 seconds more. Oh man, what happened here? What happened here? Yeah, so basically when your query folding is broken, what Mashup Engine needs to do is to go to a data source, pull all the data from there, and then apply all your steps that you defined in Power Query Editor. So instead of pulling just those rows that you need for your data set, for your report, this time it will go there and pull all the rows from the table. Maybe not all, but you remember that this fact table has around 13 million rows. So maybe it will pull like 10, 11 million rows and then apply all the transformation. I don't need to tell you how bad is that for your performance. You see that we are approximately 2 minutes here and it's still loading and loading and loading. So if you have a query like this, each time you go and refresh your data, it will take so much time. The performance when I was testing this is like 6 or 7 times more time is needed to load the data when your query folding was broken. In this case, what you could do is to move this transformation step down the pipeline as much as possible. So put it at the bottom, right at the bottom if it's possible, and then you will still get some benefit from partial query folding. Of course, always try to get a full query folding. It's really a powerful feature, as you can see here. And in first case, we had 2.8 million rows loaded, fast, efficient. Now, yeah, it's 11 million rows, and then yeah, you can see that this number is exactly the same. So in the end, you get the same outcome, but spending much more time and more resources. Fine, so yeah, I guess we covered a lot in previous 45 minutes. We explained what is data shaping and why it is important to understand this concept. Then we briefly introduced Power Query Engine, and after that we learned what is a query folding and why should we do our best to achieve it. I've also shown you some basic examples and neat tricks on how to achieve query folding in some, let's say, common use cases. Now, if you feel overwhelmed with the amount of information, or even better, if you absorbed everything and now you are curious to build on these skills you gained today, I prepared a list of resources to help you stay on track. The first and most interesting one is a 30 days of query folding challenge from Alex Powers from Microsoft. It's free, you can find it on YouTube, and I strongly recommend playing around with this. You can also refer to Chris Webb's blog to find more tips on this topic. And of course, Microsoft official documentation is also a good starting point. So I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. Leon, if you can help me if there are some questions, or I will also check in the
Definitely,
chat
Nikola.
myself.
So thank you very much for that. That was an absolutely amazing and informative session. We have a first question from Prabhav, and they ask, is there any workaround for query folding when using data flow as a source?
Not at the moment.
Okay, and another question from, and excuse my pronunciation on this, Folrado. So if there is a function in Power BI that can be converted in T-SQL syntax, query folding does work, but are there exceptions?
Basically, there should not be exceptions. So if M function can be converted to T-SQL syntax, your query will fold. Always check there is an official documentation. There is a list of functions that supports query folding, list of M functions. And these things are changing. So maybe some demos that I show you today in a few months will not be relevant anymore. Yeah, so for example, a few months ago, merging two columns was the transformation step that would break query folding. Now it supports query folding. So if there is a function that in Power Query, that was the question, it should fold.
Fantastic. And in terms of M code, where can people go to learn more of the M language?
Yeah, so I suggest, of course, Microsoft has a learning path for Power Query and M language, and also few blogs that are strongly related to Power Query and M are, as I said, Chris Webb's blog, then Imke Feldman, biaccountant.com, I think it's .com, Imke Feldman, yeah, Data Chant, Gil Raviv, yeah, exactly. Also, and thanks for the suggestion. Also, Kurbal channel, Ruth on YouTube. She pays a lot of attention to Power Query videos, so it's also a great source for learning Power Query.
Fantastic. Unless there are any more questions, I'll keep the questions open just for a moment. But thank you again ever so much, Nikola, for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us in the Microsoft Power BI UK user group. And I'd just like to apologize to anybody who had any trouble joining us in today's session. Hopefully you didn't miss too much, but the session will be recorded and made available on YouTube shortly following today's session. Okay. So it doesn't seem like there are any more questions, Nikola. So I think that you've action-packed so much information into that session, which is absolutely amazing. So I'm sure that people will come up with future questions, and we can also have you back with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me again. It was a pleasure to present, and thank you all who attended the session. If you have some questions after the session, you can't remember something, or ping me on Twitter. So I would gladly try to answer.
Definitely. Thank you very much. And just want to say this webinar was brought to you in association with Onyx Data. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, because you could have been anywhere in the world, but you've been here with us. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye. Ciao.